Welcome to the Roberts Law Office Injury Podcast. Kentucky attorney Jeff Roberts has over 25 years of experience. He'll provide answers to your questions related to personal injury and automobile accidents, workers' compensation claims, and Social Security disability benefits. Let's join Jeff for this episode. All right, we're back in Murray, Kentucky with personal injury attorney Jeff Roberts. Jeff, welcome back to the studio, guy.
Hi, Jim. How are you today?
Doing well. So we're recording this in mid-March, and so motorcycle season is just right around the corner. And you've been an avid motorcycle rider for many years, so this is a topic that's kind of near and dear to you. So let's kind of talk about some of the pre-season checkups that motorcyclists ought to think about doing before they actually get out there on the road.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're getting, and we've already had a couple of days that were nice enough to get out and ride, but motorcyclists, whenever you do get out and start riding the first part of the year, you do need to do a checkup of your bike to make sure everything is in proper working order. It's set up for a period of time, and things can, even when it's not being cranked and ran, things can go wrong with the bike. One thing you clearly need to do is check your tires, check your tire pressure on the tires before you ever get out and ride. Make sure the tires are in good shape. They have appropriate tread and that they're aired up like they're supposed to be.
Don't have any dry rot or any signs of that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There, and also check your safety equipment as well on it on the motorcycle. Make sure your headlight is still working. It comes on when you crank your motorcycle up. Most riders understand the safety aspect of that headlight being on. And when you buy a motorcycle today, the headlights are on all the time. You don't turn them on or off like some of the older bikes used to be. So the headlights are on, and that is just a huge safety factor. Even during the daytime, when people look when they're in a car and they pull up to a stop sign or a stop light, and they look in the directions, both directions, that headlight being on will alert them a lot of times if they're not looking as closely as they ought to be during times when motorcycles are out. When they see that headlight being on, that really your brain registers that even during the daytime. And it makes you much more noticeable to people operating automobiles and trucks, so that they don't pull out in front of you from a stop sign if it's you're on the major road and they're on an inferior road, or if it's a stop light and they're going to make a right-hand turn, which you can do at most intersections if there is no oncoming traffic, but you don't want them pulling out in front of you, because car versus motorcycle accident, the motorcycle rider loses every time.
Every time. And that's one of those things, again, it's such a narrow profile that, a lot of us just kind of zone out sometimes when we're driving, and we just don't pay much attention to it. And, having that headlamp on, definitely works. And the other thing at that I would think would be, check your high beam, because you're going to be driving in the evening. It happens, especially if you're, coming back from the lake or something like that, or LBL. And, it's a good time to make sure your high beam is working too. Sometimes that's a separate bulb, right?
Make sure your high beam is working well from that standpoint. But check every light on it. Make sure
your signals, brakes.
Make sure your brake lights are working. Make sure the blinkers are still working fine, because even setting up those connections can loosen up at times and not be operating correctly, or a bulb go out when you first crank it up and first turn it on.
Yeah.
So check and make sure. And frankly, it's smart to do that even with automobiles. Our headlights, we notice driving, when we put the headlights on, high beam, low beam, we notice those going out. The driver's side blinker, a lot of times we'll notice that because we can see that, and at least on the front from there. But you can have brake light out and not know it on your vehicle. In fact, I've been several years ago now, but I was driving home one night from the office during the wintertime when it gets dark very early, and got pulled over by a police officer because my brake lights, in fact, my entire tail lights, I didn't realize my entire tail lights were out on the vehicle. And he pulled me over. At first he thought I didn't even have headlights on. I suspect he thought I was intoxicated. I wasn't. But he he pulled me over, and then when he walked up, he saw the headlights were working. Talked to me for a few minutes, found out that I was fine, that there was nothing wrong with me, and he said, "Do you know your taillights aren't working at all?" And I said that, and I told him, I said, "That's the first I've heard of it," and so I've got it fixed the very next day.
Absolutely.
From
Absolutely.
that standpoint. Well, I wasn't very far from home. I don't know if I'd still been in town when he'd stopped me, because I live 12 miles out. If I'd still been in town, I don't know that I'd been allowed to drive home, but I was less than a mile out in the county on a road that had very, very little traffic. So he let me go ahead and finish up and drive home. Next day, I had that fixed.
And that's a personal safety issue. I mean, that's just, it's nice of it that he didn't really give you a citation for it, but at the same time, that's a personal safety thing, and obviously you want to get that taken care of. And I kind of make a point of that whenever I see a car driving down the road. They've got a lamp out in the back there, so you just typically don't know, like a brake light. If I can meet them at an intersection, I'll roll down the window and let them know. I mean, just a driver courtesy.
Exactly. And 90% of the people don't know when their tail lights are out, because you don't go back there. And I had my daughter's vehicle this not too long ago that I was driving, and one of the things I did, being the is I checked, make sure everything, and I made sure all the brake lights and tail lights and everything were working on the vehicle. I had to get some brakes put on it. Actually, is the reason I was driving it, and I'm going to make sure everything's working the way it ought to be working on it before I give it back to her.
Well, and that's another thing with the bike. When you're getting ready to do these preseason checks, check your cables, your brake cables and everything. Just make sure everything is in order there.
Yes.
Those things can get old. Those things can fray. They can, rust a little bit if you've got some exposed cabling. You got all sorts of things can happen.
Yeah. I mean, when you first start riding it, before you go any distance whatsoever, you should do that. Start driving a little bit in your driveway, and hit the brakes, and make sure they are working correctly. Yeah. It all comes back to safety, because especially on a motorcycle, if something fails, it can be catastrophic for the individual. It can be in a car as well, but on a motorcycle, if you're driving down the road and you're trying to come up to a stop and your brakes fail, even if it's it's a situation where there's not oncoming traffic, where you're not going to hit anybody, if you go across the road into a ditch or something, it can be very bad from that situation. So just make sure all of that equipment is working the way it's supposed to be working before you get out and start riding down the roadway at highway speeds.
Well, and that even goes for your helmet. Just make sure the straps and everything are in good condition, that nothing's dry rotted or nothing's frayed a little bit. Just things like that. I mean, it's just basic stuff, but work the face mask a few times. Just make sure you don't have anything loose. I mean, we always talk about the motorcycle itself, but there's this ancillary equipment that's awful important to you.
Yeah, all of your safety equipment, you need to check it out, especially before you ride the first time, but you need to check most of these equipment's a good idea to check them out periodically during the season as well.
I think so. So, Jeff, let's talk about this. So this is, we've done a number of episodes on this podcast about motorcycle accidents, motorcycle collisions. You've got a page on the website, obviously, and I think we've even done some videos on them. But one thing that we want to talk about today is what happens when someone pulls out in front of the motorcycle and the motorcyclist has to lay the bike down, but there's not actually contact. And that things get a little dicey there in terms of what the claim is and how they file the claim and whether that can even be done legally.
Correct. And you see it primarily with motorcycles, where the rider will lay the bike down instead of hitting a vehicle. From that, you can have no contact accidents in an automobile where somebody pulls out and you swerve and hit a ditch or something of that nature. But the primary area where I see this is in regard to motorcycles, and it kicks in a couple of different things that come into play at that point in time. The first one is, can you identify who it was that pulled out in front of you, the person that was at fault in causing the accident? If you can identify the person at fault in causing the accident, then really it's handled the same as any other accident, that there was contact. So if the person that pulled out stops and comes back and checks on you, and you get their information, get the police out there, and get all the insurance, all the driver information and owner information, you pursue that claim against the at-fault party the same as if there had been contact. There's no real difference from that perspective, other than you rely a little more on people's testimony. You know, if there's a damage to the front of your vehicle and the driver's side of their vehicle, kind of obvious they pulled out in front of you. From that standpoint, you're relying on the witnesses saying, yes, this car pulled out in front of the motorcycle, much more in these type of setting, in those type of cases. The wrinkle comes in is when you don't know who the driver is of the other vehicle, the at-fault driver, because they keep on driving and they don't stop.
Maybe they didn't see you at all.
Yeah, they may not have seen you. They may not have had any idea that you actually laid your bike down in that setting. And so they keep on driving, and nobody gets a license plate number. Nobody has any real information about who that driver was. And there have been times where we reach out through newspapers or other avenues, media, social media now, where we try to ask for, did anybody see this? Anybody know who was driving this vehicle around this time in this area, to try to find out if we can track down the owner. And that's been successful a time or two, but as a general rule, it's not successful. Right. So then you look to, and we've talked about this before, but one of the areas of coverage that you need to make sure you have good limits of coverage on, policy limits on, is uninsured motorist coverage.
And that's the UM in the UIM.
Correct.
You kind of see that, but we're specifically talking about uninsured, which is the UM side of that.
Right. Yeah. Attorneys speaking in legal speak, that's the way we would refer to it, is UM coverage is uninsured motorist coverage. Underinsured motorist coverage is UIM coverage, and you'll see it referred to that way in case law and things of that nature as well. But the uninsured motorist coverage kicks in when you're involved in an accident and the driver of the other vehicle is uninsured. Obviously, if you don't know who the driver of the other vehicle is, then that makes that vehicle, at least from the standpoint of your accident, uninsured because you don't know who they are. And if they have insurance or not. And then it kind of comes into what your policy language is. And, Kentucky law sets forth you have to have certain types of coverage. Some coverages are optional, or you purchase it. Underinsured motorist coverage is optional coverage. So you purchase that coverage over and above what is required by Kentucky law from that standpoint. But even in coverages that are required coverages, like uninsured motorist coverage, the policies can have some restrictions within them on where they apply and where they don't apply.
And I think that surprises people. Just the policies are not the same company to company to company.
Correct.
There are exclusions. There's different contract language altogether, and sometimes that's why some of them cost less than others.
Correct. One standard policy exclusion is on uninsured motorist vehicles is another vehicle that's in the household that's not insured with that same company is not considered an uninsured motorist. So if you're in a wreck with your wife driving a different vehicle that's not insured, your policy very well may say, we don't consider that an uninsured motor vehicle because it was a household member who had that vehicle. In that setting, but a policy, for the purposes of what we're talking about, the policy provision is some insurance contracts require there be contact between the vehicles, even if you do, in a hit and run type situation, or a situation where you don't know who the driver of the other vehicle is. Then they require physical contact between the vehicles before you can pursue a claim for uninsured motorists. So if you lay your bike down and you never make any contact with that other vehicle, if your policy has that provision, then you're not going to have coverage available to you, unfortunately, in that setting. If your policy doesn't have that provision, if the insurance company you're with doesn't include that in their language as an exclusion for uninsured motorists, then you would pursue an uninsured motorist claim against your own insurance company, and then they would try. It would be their obligation if they wanted reimbursement to try to find who the driver of that other vehicle was in that setting.
And that's normal. I mean, this is a policy that you're taking out. This is additional coverage, to some extent, and because of that, you're actually filing against your own insurance policy, and that throws a lot of people. But that's actually how it works. It's a contract between you and your insurance carrier.
Correct. Exactly. It's coverage
It's
that
like life
you're
insurance.
paying for.
It's like life insurance.
Yeah, it's coverage you don't want to use, but it's there, and when it's time, you should use it. And in Kentucky, there are regulations on the books that say if you use and I hear this from a lot of people, they say, I don't want to use underinsured motorist coverage or uninsured motorist coverage because it's going to make my premiums go up. There's provisions under Kentucky's administrative regulations that prohibit that. So if you're not at fault in causing the accident, the fact that you seek recovery under your uninsured motorist or your underinsured motorist or your no fault or PIP coverage does not raise your premiums. They cannot raise your premiums for that reason.
And that's a good reason to have this. I mean,
Yeah.
all things being equal, if you're in a situation like this, you need coverage because you're going to have damage. You could have medical bills. You're definitely going to have property damage.
Right.
I mean, you need to be covered.
Yeah, exactly.
These bikes are not cheap anymore.
Exactly. You need to have the coverage there, and I've talked to people, and it's always seemed somewhat odd to me, but I've talked to people who have no problem submitting their property damage from an accident to their own insurance when the other vehicle was uninsured to get their vehicle fixed, but then they balk at presenting an uninsured motorist claim for their personal injuries, and I really truly don't understand the thought process behind that, because frankly, to me, my physical body is much more valuable to me, and my health is much more valuable to me than my front bumper on my vehicle. And I don't comprehend, and I've asked some clients that, well, you pursued the property damage from your own insurance company. Why would you not? Nobody's been able to give me a real good answer. When I explain to them my thought process on it, most of the time they say, that's a very valid point. I should pursue that.
Yeah.
And when they find out that, I think part of it is they think that it's pursuing that's really going to reduce or increase their premiums, and the other part is they can't pay to fix their vehicle, and so they kind of think that that's my only avenue to get my car up and running so I can get back to work and things of that nature. So I do understand it from that perspective.
It's going to be a little hesitant, but at the end of the day, you probably are going to need to do this.
Yes, you need to look at using your own coverage, or if you're not going to, quit paying for it.
Well, Jeff, let me ask you this. I mean, you said something a minute ago that just kind of threw up a question mark for me. If I have uninsured motorist coverage, does that cover both my property and my bodily injury?
That covers your bodily injury.
Okay, but not necessarily the property damage.
It does not cover the property. You have to have, there are other types of coverage that would kick in to pay your property damage from an accident if you're involved with an uninsured motorist vehicle. That's collision coverage. Collision coverage kicks in if you're in a collision and the other person is uninsured, then your collision coverage will pay to fix your vehicle. And another type is comprehensive coverage, and that's if you're involved with a deer or something of that nature, or you're at fault in causing the accident, then the comprehensive will kick in to pay you the property damage for your vehicle in that situation.
Okay. Now, let me ask you this, because I think a lot of people get confused about this if they don't take time to really, really think it through. If I'm driving a motorcycle and I've got UIM coverage on my car sitting in the driveway, but I'm on my motorcycle at this point, is that policy transferable? Does that cover me? Because, hey, look, I've got it. It's just not on my motorcycle. Can I tap into coverage I'm already paying for on a different vehicle?
Most likely not. If the vehicles are insured in the same policy, then potentially. That is,
So if I've got State Farm riding both my motorcycle and my automobile,
and they're on the same policy, then paying a premium for one will basically apply to the other. But a lot of automobile insurance policies will have a provision in them that for uninsured motorists and underinsured motorists, that it does not apply if you are on a motorcycle at the time. There are some companies that do not write motorcycle insurance at all. And they're the ones who originally started including that language in their policies, that they don't cover that. And that's been held to be a valid exclusion for uninsured and underinsured motorists for a motorcyclist who didn't have coverage on their motorcycle for that. And so you need to make sure you really have it on your motorcycle or it's going to apply. If both are covered under the same policy, so you got vehicle one is your pickup truck and vehicle two is your motorcycle, you only pay a premium for uninsured motorists on the pickup truck, you're probably going to have it in that because both vehicles are under the exact same insurance in that's considered individual coverage under Kentucky. So if you pay that premium, you get that even if you're not in that vehicle at the time of the collision. Some states aren't like that, but that's the way Kentucky is. And it's the same if you got a pickup truck and a car and you're only paying uninsured on one, you've got uninsured coverage or whatever those limits are. If you're paying uninsured on both and paying a premium for both vehicles, then you actually stack it and you got twice the amount of uninsured motorist coverage in that setting.
which again could be a really good thing if you have to actually use it.
It can be a very good thing if you actually have to use it from there. And that's one reason why you should, first off, talk to your insurance agent to make sure you've got the coverages that you need on all of your vehicles. But also, when you're in an accident, a collision, to go talk to an attorney to verify exactly what coverages you do have. Because I've had times where the claims representative would say, you don't have uninsured motorist coverage on this vehicle, and I look at the policy and they didn't on that vehicle, but on another vehicle on that same policy they did, so they actually had uninsured motorist coverage. And I don't think it was the claims representative intentionally misleading the person who was injured. It was a claims representative that handled multiple different states, and they didn't realize Kentucky handled it differently than Tennessee or Indiana or some other state handles it. So they thought, well, no, you don't have coverage, when in fact they did have coverage.
Well, it'll be awful nice when the rest of the country comes around to our way of doing things, and we can lead the way a little bit more. So
on some things we are very good. Other things that we need to follow suit with some other states on that. But in regard to that coverage and the way we deal with uninsured motorists and underinsured motorists, Kentucky, the way we handle it is the way I think it should be handled.
Right.
Because if you're paying for the coverage, then doesn't matter which vehicle you're paying it on. If you're paying the premium to have that coverage, then you should have that coverage.
Right. Jeff, obviously we're talking about motorcycle collisions, motorcycle accidents, and things we can do to help avoid or deal with it if it does in fact happen to you. One thing, I think we've addressed this before, but I want to come back because there is a significant difference in Kentucky, I believe, between an automobile policy and a motorcycle policy and something called PIP coverage, no fault coverage. Obviously in a car, you've got up to $10,000 worth of kind of automatic coverage. Does that apply to motorcycles, and how is that different?
It does and doesn't. And when I say that, PIP coverage is mandatory coverage on an automobile. When an insurance company writes a policy for an automobile coverage in Kentucky, they cannot exclude PIP coverage unless you sign a written waiver of that coverage. So you can reject it, but you have to sign a written rejection of that coverage for you not to have that coverage on your vehicle. On a motorcycle, PIP coverage or no-fault coverage is optional coverage. So you actually have to request that coverage to have that coverage. You can get it on a motorcycle. I have it on my motorcycle, but you have to tell the agent, because frankly, most policies most agents, I won't say that, some agents will write you the policy that's got the least premium possible.
Because a lot of people shop on price.
Yeah, a lot of people shop on price. A good agent will say, here's your options. I strongly recommend you have this coverage. It's going to increase your premium up a little bit because of that by this amount. But if you don't have this coverage and you are involved in an accident, motorcycle accident, and you're out of work unless you have disability insurance somewhere, your lost wages aren't going to be covered up to $10,000, or your medical bills aren't going to be covered up to $10,000. And that's one thing. I'm sure we've talked about it in a prior episode. But if you reject the no fault on your automobile, or you don't purchase it on your motorcycle, you are prohibited under Kentucky law from recovering for the first $10,000 of lost wages and or medical bills.
You're just out.
You're out. So that $10,000, the at-fault driver does not pay that $10,000 of medical. So,
because you actually volunteered or opted out.
Correct. You opted out of it or failed to purchase it, which is an opt-out on a motorcycle. You failed to purchase it. If you don't have that coverage, you don't get those damages from that standpoint. So it's very vital that you have that coverage, or you make sure you got really, really good health insurance and disability insurance, because you're going to have problems there. And even with the health insurance, once they find out that it's involved in a motor vehicle accident, they're going to balk on paying any of your medical bills as well, because they're going to say PIP should be covering this, no fault should be covering this, not us. And you're going to have some explaining to do, Lucy.
Right, exactly. And unfortunately, and if you've ridden motorcycles for any amount of time, you know the injuries are going to be, as Jeff, as I think you said earlier in this episode, catastrophic more often than not. I mean, if you're on a highway and something happens, it's going to be serious.
Exactly.
And so whether it's for you personally or for your family, making sure you do have the right adequate coverages in play before you hit the road.
Exactly. Yeah.
That was not said on purpose, but before you get out on the road, I should say.
I understand it. That is true, and it's one thing when we talked. Or at the very start, we talked about checking your safety equipment and all of that. I know at least some companies would write coverage for certain periods of the year. So you didn't, you can purchase insurance where you did not have motorcycle insurance for January, February, and March, and it would kick in April, on April 1st. So if you have that type of policy, don't get out until April 1st.
Yeah.
Best not to have that type of policy, because if you're like me, when you have a really good warm day and it's been a long time, you really kind of want to get out there and get on the road.
It's not worth risking.
From that standpoint. But if you don't have the insurance on it, don't get out there on the road, because first off, if you get pulled over and you don't have insurance, you're going to get a ticket for it. And the more important part is, if you're involved in a collision and you don't have insurance, you're going to be the one paying the price for it at that point.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I hope this episode's been helpful. And about this time every year, we try to come back and really spend a little bit of time talking about motorcycles. They're a lot of fun. People enjoy them. I mean, as we said earlier, you've ridden for many, many years. And the issue becomes, in all reality, you want to do so safely. And so, listen to kind of what the advice that Jeff gave early on. And he was saying that obviously you want to check your headlamps, you want to check your brakes, you want to check the cables, you want to check all of that, and maybe back it up and down the driveway a few times, or take it down the neighborhood street, just to make sure everything seems to be working. And if it's not, you still got time to go get it repaired before the season really kicks in. And then this might also be a good time to sit down with your insurance agent. Just make sure you've got the right kind of coverage in there, and that you understand fully what kind of coverage is, and more importantly, what kind of exclusions you actually have.
Absolutely. Right now is the time of year to do that. And on good warm days, get out there and enjoy the road and do so safely.
Absolutely. Jeff, thanks for this one. We'll be back in about 2 weeks.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to the Roberts Law Office Injury Podcast. Jeff will return in 2 weeks. Until then, he invites you to visit jeffrobertslaw.com and follow his firm on Facebook. At the Roberts Law Office, you'll find a history of small town service and big city results.